Saiakwatsirón. So I've been asked to do a little discussion on my thesis that I did at the University of Victoria in British Columbia. And I chose to do it on the language because of my own personal experiences with it and a lot of the questions that came up while I thought about it. It was mostly questions, and I wondered if other people were experiencing the same things that I did. And so I was looking at what they called silent speakers. And I didn't know there was a term for people who were raised around the language and they could understand everything they heard, but they didn't speak it. And while at UVic, I learned that there was a term for this. And so it really made me pay attention to myself. And so in doing my research, which was supposed to be a project, but took on being more of a thesis, I started to look into it and doing my own little bit of research on it. And spending a lot of time in my dorm by myself, I was able to look at all the different reasons as to why I grew up in a speaking home with two speaking parents. All my family spoke the language, and looking at why did I not speak, and how old was I when I stopped speaking, or did I speak when I was little? And so a lot of these questions are what led me to doing this research that I did on silent speakers. And also in looking at silent speakers, I found that there wasn't a lot of research done in this area, and that I thought, it would be a good time to make silent speakers a topic of my research. And so in starting, I wanted to introduce first who I was. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read part of the research and maybe go into explaining more than what I had actually written. So I start with an introduction on Kahentéhtha, which is a historical background. And this first part that I want to read was taken from Condoled Doug George's book that he had written in 2006. And he writes, "History among the Mohawks is a highly personal matter, since it involves the life stories of a people with deep spiritual connection to the place in which they have grown. When a Mohawk person speaks of his or her community, it becomes a narrative in which they carry the experiences of their ancestors across the generations." So this really struck me because that's what I felt I was doing. It was looking at a place that I had grown. And when it came to this language of Kanien'kéha, it was like intertwined with who I was. Historically, colonization and the effects of the dominant language of English, the imposition of the international border, and political and economic factors have contributed greatly to the language shift of many indigenous peoples. Leanne Hinton explains that over and over again we have seen the marginalization, enslavement, or even genocide of groups of people who were the stewards of their land before the political, economic, or military imperial forces of colonization. So the nations that are in the Haudenosaunee Confederacy are the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca, and are known as the Five Nations, also known as the Haudenosaunee, who are the people of the Long Coast. Their territories start in the east from the Mohawk Valley to the Genesee Valley in the west. One of the nations of the people was the Kanien'kéha, also referred to as the Mohawk Nation. So Doug George, in his book entitled Iroquois on Fire in 2006, explains that long before European contact, the Mohawks had thriving villages in the St. Lawrence River and Lake Champlain valleys, where the people, although they left, were remembered and affirmed as never having ceded jurisdiction in those regions. The Kanien'kéha are now located in Ontario and Quebec, Canada, and New York, United States, with the 8 communities of Akwesasne, Ganatjahalege, Kahnawake, Kanisadage, Kanien'kéha, Tyendinaga, Wahda, and Oswego, because they had all migrated into different locations. Akwesasne is also called St. Regis, is surrounded by the Grass, Racket, St. Lawrence, and St. Regis rivers. Historically, it was the hunting and fishing grounds for the Kanien'kéha and was settled as a community at the time when people were being removed from their traditional homelands in the Mohawk Valley, causing them to migrate further north. Akwesasne also holds many islands, which are a part of the community. The community is made up of various political entities along with various faiths and beliefs, and together they make up the community of Akwesasne. Kanien'kéha. Kanien'kéha is the language of the people of the Flint. The natural or original language is the means of communication of people to other people and other living entities. It is used in identifying oneself and identifying relationships to other people and living organisms. It is the means used to express one's gratitude through words of thanksgiving and appreciation, ceremonies, songs, and other ways of knowing. Language connects our past, present, and future through intergenerational transmission from the ancestors who have passed to those coming whose faces are still in the ground. Language expresses who we are, where we are, and where we are going. Kanien'kéha was the first language of the Kanien'kéha at Akwesasne, but with the implementation of the educational system through convent, residential, and day schools, much of the language began to deteriorate. In a publication by the U.S. Census Office dated 1892, it states, "The New York Commission of 1889, in commenting on the good work accomplished by the Jesuit priests, very pertinently said, the neglect, however, of these missionaries to teach them the English language is a serious misfortune." This was to be expected, as the missionaries themselves could not speak English, only French. After the imposed United States and Canadian border, the Kanien'kéha at Akwesasne were referred to as the Canadian St. Regis Indians and the American St. Regis Indians, which complicated the geography and politics of the community. The publication also states that contact with the Canadian St. Regis Indians, however social and tribal in its affinities and intercourse, retards rather than quickens the American St. Regis Indians in the acquisition of the English language. It was also stated about Kanien'kéha residing in New York State that the New York Indians should understand that they must make the acquisition of the English language an essential element in their dealings with the white people. When any of my elders talk Mohawk, when they describe something, it's just as if the whole side of this building was the great big screen of an outdoor theater that has 3 dimensions to it. You know how you have to wear those special glasses and they make 3 dimensions? When you hear the language and you understand, it's like a 3D. It's in Technicolor. If you can really understand Indian, you can smell the food when it's cooking. You can smell the trees and the water when someone is speaking it. It's a living language, yeah. And then when it's interpreted into English, it becomes just a little 6-inch black and white television set. English is just capitals, darks, and ends with a period, and that's all. You know what I mean? That's the way it appears. Very not, living for me. And that was said by Tom Porter in 2008. According to the Mohawk scholar, the Jeremy Green, in 2018, Kanien'kéha is considered to be moribund, a critically endangered language where the active users of the language are members of the grandparent generation or older. According to the information he has provided on Kanien'kéha communities, there are approximately 932 native speakers of Kanien'kéha in the world. There are 932 L1 speakers of Kanien'kéha, those who have learned Kanien'kéha from their families as a first language and continue to speak it today. There are 14 L1 speaking families, speakers who have transmitted Kanien'kéha within their family with no disruption and still speak today. There are 1,036 L2 speakers of Kanien'kéha at advanced to mid-proficiency level. Those who did not speak Kanien'kéha as their first language within the home and learned to speak it later. There is a total of 21 L1 children who are children of L2 speakers of Kanien'kéha. Parents who learned Kanien'kéha as a second language and transmitted it to their children as their first language. It is not yet documented how many silent speakers exist in Kanien'kéha communities, but regenerating a generation or 2 of speakers would definitely be a positive move to create more speakers of Kanien'kéha. Our fire. My chosen metaphor for language revitalization is fire. Fire being one of the first life givers and helpers in sustaining people. Language which also sustains us, giving us the ability to communicate with others and the environment surrounding us. As fire came to us from Izinagaluhyadi beyond the sky world, our language was given to the unborn by the ancestors, a gift of communication and expression to Hunjadi, the earth and life upon it. As the fire on earth is fed and burns bright with warmth, the language of our people is revitalized through learning and flourishes with each speaker. The emergence of 2 fires was created on earth. The ceremony fire, through the mental, emotional, and spiritual language, acknowledges all that has transpired within the gifts brought from Izinagaluhyadi and our ability to express them. The political fire within the physical realm brings balance as we seek to reclaim and maintain our languages for the future. Fire guides my research project on silent speakers, people who understand Kanien'kéha but do not speak it. Situating self in the research. Kahentéhtha ni yungets. Kahentéhtha linguists yun dagyatskwe ne age ni sta tano degaluhyanego luayatskwe ne lagi ni gaha. Wagata huni tano ugaho ni wagi dalod. Akuzasne ni de wageno tano tunue tkidelo. Kanien'kéha ni wagohunjodo salhoane ni wagatwajilido. My name is Kahentéhtha, which means she stands at the front. I'm also called Angela Elijah. My mother was Kahentéhtha linguist Judy Point, and my father was Degaluhyanego Jake Swamp. I am of the Wolf Clan people who are the path makers. I was born and raised in the Kanien'kéha community of Akwesasne, land where the partridges drum, which is situated on the banks of the St. Lawrence River, St. Regis River, and Racket River. I currently reside in the community of Akwesasne. I am from the Mohawk Nation, and I descend from the matrilineal line of Salahoane, the majestic tree family, one of 3 Wolf Clan families of the Kanien'kéha. Shigewila, when I was a baby. As a newborn baby coming into this world, I was placed into a family of parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and many cousins who spoke Kanien'kéha fluently. My mother was a young mother who stayed at home tending to my older brother and I, and later 5 younger siblings. She was raised in a part of Akwesasne called Kawihnoge, Cornwall Island. Her mother, Douglas Eva Jacobs, was well known for her splint basket making and was a Condoled Clan Mother for the Salahoane family. Her father, Aluhyageha Louis Point, was a hunter-trapper and also worked as an iron worker. They had a small farm and raised their 9 children there. They were a traditional family and would take a boat or ferry across the river, then walk to attend ceremonies at the Longhouse. My father left school at the age of 15 to work iron in a nearby city to support his mother and siblings because of a car accident that left his father, Yoladekagaha Leo Swamp, in a coma for 5 months. They also had a farm where the family tended to milking cows, took care of pigs, gardens, and hay in fields. His mother, Degaluhyanego Charlotte Papineau, made homemade butter and cream and sold to the community, while his father became the local butcher after recuperating from the car accident. They were a church-going family and did not involve themselves in traditional practices, but both my parents' families immersed me in unconditional love and Kanien'kéha. Growing up in a household where Kanien'kéha was commonly heard, I was distanced from the harsh realities of what had happened to our great-grandparents and our ancestors in the efforts to colonize and Christianize the Kanien'kéha people. I grew up in the after effects of a brutal history from 500 years previous, and all my experiences were quite normal. Little did I know that our language was threatened, and that years before my time, my great-grandmother, Charlotte's mother, Sarah LaFrance, was removed from her parents at the age of 8 years old to attend the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, located in central Pennsylvania. At Carlisle and many other residential schools for Native children, students were forbidden to speak their native languages or practice their traditional ways of life. Carlisle's founder and school superintendent, Richard H. Pratt, associated with the phrase, "Kill the Indian, save the man," was in charge of the first government-run all-Indian student off-reservation residential school, where complete assimilation into mainstream white America was the goal. Shigeksa, when I was a girl. Throughout my childhood, Kanien'kéha was the language commonly heard within the households of various family members. As I walked in and out of my aunts' and uncles' homes, Kanien'kéha was the prominent language used. I started school without any knowledge of the English language. I recall speaking with my cousins at school, and teachers would separate us so we couldn't talk the language to one another. I don't recall being punished physically, but the separation was enough to enforce that speaking Kanien'kéha was not tolerated. I was a timid little girl, and the experience created some anxiety for all of us as we sat on the floor crying. From that time on, I began to learn the English language. It came easily as most of the children spoke it, coming into the St. Regis Mohawk School. With time, it became more common to use the English language, not only at school, but at home as well. No one expressed the need for us to speak Kanien'kéha until we were all older and had become accustomed to speaking English on a regular basis. By the age of 9 years old, I was no longer using Kanien'kéha. In school, there was a Mohawk language class which I excelled in because I had the understanding of the language as a first language speaker. Other children no longer spoke, and my cousins also spoke less of the language. We attended ceremonies regularly throughout the year, and Kanien'kéha was heard within the longhouse as men stood up from both sides of the house in representation of the clan families. When the speaking, singing, and dancing were finished, we would eat together before the closing words were spoken. I loved going to the longhouse and meeting up with my cousins. My aunts and uncles would speak Kanien'kéha to me, but I would respond in English. Some of my older cousins still spoke Kanien'kéha, but it seemed the younger ones no longer spoke. After longhouse ceremonies were over, I would go home with my aunts and cousins, where I would spend the night, and my mother would pick me up the next day. We would attend lacrosse games in the nearby city of Cornwall, and the elders were heard speaking Kanien'kéha with one another. I remember all of the laughter and teasing that went on between the elders during the games, especially between our sister communities, all speaking Kanien'kéha. When I was a teenager. By the time I was a teenager, I was more focused on my friends, and although we still attended social and ceremonial doings at the longhouse, most of the teenagers no longer spoke the language. I recall going to visit my grandparents with my parents. I sat and listened as they all conversed Kanien'kéha, but when one of them spoke to me, I would drop my head in silence and feel very ashamed that I was not responding to them in Kanien'kéha. I felt especially sad when not speaking to my grandmother, as she did not speak English at all. When my grandmother questioned me in Kanien'kéha, asking why I no longer spoke our language, again I was silent as shame and guilt ran through me. After a while, I began to avoid seeing them, so I wouldn't be put on the spot and experience feelings of inadequacy and shame. It was easier to stay away. I quit school at the age of 14, and my father placed me within the homes of basket makers, where I learned basket making in silence. They spoke, and I listened, nodded, and smiled. I did not speak. I stayed silent. I thought of what I could say, but I was afraid to say it wrong. I also felt a very sad feeling that I was somehow disrespecting my elders by not answering, not realizing that many people in my community were going through similar situations. By my late teens, a Kanien'kéha revitalization movement had begun in Akwesasne due to the language loss they were seeing amongst the upcoming generation. There was a lot of conflict within the Akwesasne education systems. Many people wanted more for their children in the way of culture and language. The refusal of schools to meet the people's demands initiated the removal of many students from the education system. In 1979, an unprecedented effort to revitalize the Mohawk culture and language began with the establishment of the community-based Akwesasne Freedom School, which would in time become a Mohawk language immersion school. At its beginning, the school was based in cultural teachings and English studies, but eventually evolved into a full Kanien'kéha language immersion school, which continues to this day. In the first year, my aunt volunteered as one of the teachers for a kindergarten class. It was the only immersion class at the time, and she asked me to assist her. I immediately wondered if I was capable of speaking to children, but I realized I wouldn't know unless I tried. I assisted her for a little while as I didn't want to refuse her, but I also felt uncomfortable with my language skills, especially when speaking in front of her. Eventually, I stayed with the school for a few years afterwards and worked as a second language teacher to students in high school. Teaching was not the career I chose at the time, but I ended up there because somebody believed I could do it. Yagungwe Nigatod. I am a woman. I eventually married and moved to my husband's community of Oneida, a Ladino-Shuni community 7 hours away from my home community of Akwesasne. It wasn't until I became an adult that I truly understood what residential schools were. Having moved into my husband's community, I learned that his mother was abandoned and left at the Mount Elgin Industrial Institute in Muncie, Ontario, when she was 4 years old, and where she remained until she graduated at the age of 17 years old. Because she was abandoned, she had no one to return to and stayed at the school to repair clothing all summer long. She rarely spoke about being at Mount Elgin except to mention how often they had to pray at the residential school. As stories began to surface from past students, someone set fire to the school and it burned down. Today we continue to struggle to reclaim our languages and heal from intergenerational traumas inflicted on our people. For Aboriginal peoples, centuries of colonial policies and practices aimed at suppressing and undermining cultural identity while simultaneously assimilating children into Euro-Western culture through the residential school system have led to severe trauma that is being passed through the generations. I lived amongst the Oneida people for 14 years, and during that time, I involved myself with helping to implement the Onyota'aga language immersion program in their elementary school. I also participated in a 200-hour Oneida language course with Oneida elders. Anyone interested in assisting or teaching in the Oneida immersion program was expected to take the course. I did it out of interest, but because I did well, I was asked to assist in the classroom. I also did Oneida language work in the daycare system, but parents questioned why an Oneida had not been hired for the position. Sadly, the position had been posted for a few months, but Oneida people hadn't applied. A few years later, the Oneida immersion program folded due to lack of interest and teachers. Although being involved in the Oneida revitalization efforts felt good, and my children were students within the Oneida immersion program, I regretted leaving my own community and not having my children enrolled in a Kanien'kéha immersion school. Today, many young adults in Oneida have come together and created an adult immersion program which is thriving due to their commitment to the Oneida language. Kilihunyanis, I am a teacher. Eventually, I became a certified teacher and moved back to my home community of Akwesasne, where I was employed as a native as a second language and culture teacher for 10 years. I also did curriculum work and coordinated a Mohawk and Cayuga language preservation project, making language resources for the immersion programs in the community of 6 nations. During the time I was exposed to the Cayuga language, which furthered my understanding of another Haudenosaunee language. I did a lot of language work with the Oneida and Cayuga languages, but shamefully, I still was not speaking Kanien'kéha, and my children weren't either. I felt a sense of failure as I did not teach or expose my children to Kanien'kéha. Currently, I work as a Kanien'kéha immersion teacher and have been teaching in an immersion setting for the past 6 years, allowing me to be in situations where using Kanien'kéha is expected, thus helping me to become a speaker again. In the beginning, I recall trying immersion teaching and not feeling very confident of my speaking ability. I kept at it, and I felt comfortable speaking to children and L2 speakers, those who had learned Kanien'kéha as a second language. I was very fortunate to have also had many fluent speakers of Kanien'kéha along the way, offering nothing but encouragement and helping me to say what I could not remember. I still have a ways to go in my learning, but right now I'm doing the best I can in being a speaker of Kanien'kéha again. Kasutsala Nikyadod. I am a grandmother. Because I had not taught my children Kanien'kéha, they enrolled their own children in Mohawk and Cayuga immersion programs so they would become speakers of the languages. It became clear to me that to fulfill the responsibilities of being a grandmother and a clan mother, I needed my language back and felt that the best place I could be was in a teaching position in an immersion setting. In order to teach Kanien'kéha, I had to know the target language. This meant that I had to study what I would be presenting in future lessons and to know what I was saying. I feel that this helped me to learn and gain the confidence needed to become a speaker. Furthermore, with most of my grandchildren being in Cayuga and Mohawk immersion school, I found the incentive I needed to learn as much as I could in both languages, making it possible to converse with my grandchildren. Gatnistosela Wagilihunde. I am a clan mother. In 2005, I was asked to take my grandmother's seat as a Wolf Clan mother. The fact that I did not speak Kanien'kéha weighed heavily upon me. I understood everything being spoken, but I was silent when it came to speaking. As a clan mother for the Salahoan family, my lack of Kanien'kéha speaking ability made me question if I should be the one to carry a place of such high responsibility within the nation. It was a responsibility held by my grandmothers before me who spoke their mother tongue, and for various reasons I didn't. I felt I was a missing link who had let my ancestors and my family down. I knew all the eyes of my family were upon me as I asked myself, am I capable? Am I good enough? Can I find it within myself to be a speaker of Kanien'kéha again? Am I courageous enough to face and conquer all of the ugly feelings placed upon me by colonization and historical trauma? The questions went around and around in my mind, and I knew very well that only I held the answers to my questions, and that I would have to be answerable to myself first. A Stolo scholar by the name of Joanne Archibald says it very well when stating that the legacy of colonizing knowledge has created a disconnection of people from their traditional teachings, people, family, community, spiritual leaders, medicine people, land, and so on. My state of being at that time was not good. Currently, within the Longhouse, I have witnessed the empty streets of responsibility around the ceremonial and political fires. If Kanien'kéha is not transmitted to upcoming generations of people, it will be difficult to follow protocols at the ceremonial and political levels and to fulfill the responsibilities of the clan families, communities, nation, and confederacy. Many activities within the traditional circle, such as birthing, naming, rites of passage, weddings, funerals, ceremonies, and meetings are currently being done, with most of the responsibilities being conducted by only a few people who are fluent speakers of Kanien'kéha. One does not automatically gain the culture by learning the language. Language is a very changeable form of behavior, and if language is taught outside of and without reference to the traditional culture, then that language will be devoid of that culture. As a silent speaker, I knew that the only way around the situation was to go through it. I had to face the obstacles I had within me to become a speaker of Kanien'kéha once again. I had to conquer the fear, guilt, shame, grief, and regrets, but how would I do it? Our Akwesasne Longhouse is about 50 or 60 foot wide and 100 foot long. It's a long log longhouse, and it can hold 600 or 700 people in one sitting. So today at midwinter, everybody comes to the New Year's dances, and you can't find a place to sit. They even bring extra chairs, but there's hardly any room to dance. It's so packed. But now today we're in a dilemma. We're in a real dilemma. It makes me feel sad. You know why? The majority of them, about 3/4, if not more, of all the Mohawks that are jam-packed in there, they don't understand what the faith keepers and chiefs are saying when they're speaking at midwinter. They don't really know. And this skit got said by Tom Porter in 2008. As I looked around at the faces at ceremonial, political, and social gatherings, I began to wonder how many people experience similar feelings. If they felt as I felt, what could be done to inspire silent speakers and regenerate speakers of Kanien'kéha? Kahentéhtha. I am a student. Upon enrolling in the Master of Indigenous Languages Revitalization Program at the University of Victoria, I began to realize that many people and communities were facing the same obstacles as myself. I felt I now had the opportunity to examine the issues which plagued my mind when it came to my language situation. I then decided to reach out to my own immediate family and to extended Wolf Clan families to give voice to their shared experiences as carrying out research with Indigenous communities that incorporates Indigenous story methodologies can help develop rich, locally relevant insights that may better guide culturally responsive understandings. In creating a space to share their experiences, my hope was also to inspire them to become speakers again. It wasn't only about reclaiming the language, it was about reclaiming who we were as Kanien'kéha and keeping our identity and language intact for the coming generations. In the Indigenous Research Methods course taught by the late Trish Rosborough, I prepared a mini research project entitled Contributing factors of passive speakers in a Kanien'kéha family, which evolved from my interest and discussions with Trish. Because of my personal interest as a silent speaker, I decided to interview my siblings to explore contributing factors to silent speakers within a Kanien'kéha family. My decision to research my siblings was to find out if people within the same family experience language loss and become silent speakers due to common factors. It was also a personal reason to find out if they also carried similar feelings as I began to speak and reclaim Kanien'kéha. The research was focused on how children within a family became silent speakers, while parents and extended family members were fluent speakers of Kanien'kéha. 5 interview questions were asked to gain an understanding of their experiences and feelings surrounding the factors that they believe contributed to their silence. The common themes contributing to their silence were: Number 1, being sent to school and speaking the dominant language of English. 2, isolation due to the international border. 3, feelings of fear, guilt, shame, and grief at not speaking. 4, loss of relationships with grandparents and elders within the family. And 5, loss of identity and cultural competence. 6, the inability to speak to their own children, which created a disruption in transmission. After doing the mini research project with my siblings, I decided to expand my research to people within the 3 wolf clan families in Akwesasne. Literature review. Today, 1 to 2 generations are silent speakers, people who understand the language but do not speak, within the Kanien'kéha community of Akwesasne, which has a population of 12,896 people. Although there are numerous contributing factors, the overall reason is intergenerational trauma caused by colonization. Mainstream and traditional, culturally appropriate therapies may assist in regenerating speakers of Kanien'kéha, but is dependent upon how receptive silent speakers are to therapeutic methods and how committed they are to healing and speaking again. It is critical that it be studied in order to regenerate speakers of Kanien'kéha. However, learning more about mainstream and traditional healing methods can create an awareness of trauma and its causes. Furthermore, many people are not aware of being silent speakers and also lack the historical knowledge of language loss within the community and nation. Colonization and intergenerational trauma. European colonization has been the main cause of language and culture loss in First Nations communities in Canada. There have also been many policies enforced within First Nations communities in regards to land, rights, and educational institutions. The Royal Commission on First Nations People states, federal policy toward Aboriginal people has its roots in a power set out in the Constitution of 1867. Since early British colonial times, a legislative power has been reserved to the central government to protect the interests of Aboriginal peoples, first from local settler interests and since 1867 from provincial interests. With the experiences of the colonization process, Aboriginal people have experienced many traumas which have had a negative impact on their mental health to this day. Healing, in Aboriginal terms, refers to personal and societal recovery from the lasting effects of oppression and systemic racism experienced over generations. First Nations peoples have experienced cultural, linguistic, and heritage suppression, which is a form of disempowerment and genocide. Across several studies, the continuous assault on the identity of First Nations peoples and suppression has led to an erosion of mental health and well-being through high rates of depression, alcoholism, suicide, and violence. The oppression and abuse have become internalized, leading to shame and hopelessness. The goal to eradicate Indigenous people has had a devastating impact and undermined all aspects of well-being. The idea to assimilate Aboriginal people in order to civilize them was done through various colonial policies. Policies were motivated by paternalistic attitudes which created collective grief, trauma, loss, and mental health problems. Land policies forced relocations of First Nations people, which alienated them from their families, communities, and shared Indigenous knowledge, and disrupted their connection to the land. Across several studies, we found that children were removed from their homes and separated from their parents and way of life. It is stated that although languages have come and gone throughout history, Indigenous languages in a variety of post-colonial situations have been oppressed through official policies and social pressures. Some agree that Aboriginal peoples were denied basic rights to transmit traditions and maintain cultural identity through acts of genocide, violence, and abuse. The impact of intergenerational trauma, a psychological term that is to explain how trauma is passed from one generation to the next, has led to self-destructive behaviors such as suicide, substance abuse, and violence. The impacts and legacy of shame, loss, and self-hatred on health and well-being has been transmitted to subsequent generations through physiological, psychological, and social processes, and has created a disruption of cohesion, structure, and quality of family life, and has also affected the transmission of ancestral languages. In their study on language and culture as protective factors, they determined that without the language of one's ancestors, individual and collective identity gets weakened, eradicating the culture within a few generations. Silent speakers. Historical intergenerational trauma has had a negative impact on the ancestral languages of Aboriginal peoples. Languages which once flowed freely have become silenced. Aboriginal people now struggle to reclaim and keep their languages alive through various programs within their communities. As programs seek fluent elders within the communities to assist in language revitalization efforts, there is a forgotten group who carry the label of being latent speakers, semi-speakers, passive speakers, and in this research project, silent speakers. These speakers are in a league of their own as they understand what is being said, but for various reasons do not speak their ancestral languages. In researching the topic of silent speakers, there appears to have been little research done. The literature presented here shares few common themes. However, the topics are crucial to regenerating speakers of Kanien'kéha. In her study of semi-speakers of the Gaelic language in the east southern villages of Scotland, Nancy Dorian takes a linguistic approach and addresses the reduction and loss of languages which are spoken only by a few people. She views the semi-speaker as being a problem in language death, as there is an assumption that the reduced use of the language will lead to a reduced form of that language. In another study of the Gaelic language, Nancy Dorian says that when a language is dying, it changes in its phonology, how sounds systemically behave. For example, in Gaelic, the mutational system, where speakers will either substitute or leave out the consonants, has begun to change. She says it can be expected within changes in the lexicon, what is considered to be the mental dictionary and the speaker's knowledge of words and how they are used. Morphology, the internal structure of words and syntax, the grammatical structure of words and how words are used to create phrases and sentences. When referring to the community of Gaelic speakers, Dorian observes elder speakers being more comfortable in speaking Gaelic and younger people being more comfortable with speaking English. She states it has caused the younger people to speak an imperfect version of the language and become less fluent. In further studies of silent speakers, it states how the Kahentéhtha language in northwestern Alberta, right about the Athabascan languages of Alaska, and Juso writes about the Sami language of Norway. All agree that language is important to traditional knowledge, culture, and identity. While Dorian addresses mutation and changes in lexicon, morphology, and syntax because of less use of the language, Juso and Fathom agree that strategies need to be put into place to encourage silent speakers to speak. They draw attention to the fact that there are a few adult programs in place as the focus is more on children. There is also mention that to speak confidently, adults must be actively participating in various activities, such as being with fluent speakers to practice speaking. One person speaks to how language is measured and raises questions as to how many speakers are needed to be considered endangered, and at what level of fluency does one need to be considered an endangered language speaker. In the use of various scales in measuring fluency, Botoga states that language fluency cannot easily be categorized and measured in endangered languages, and that the varying levels of fluency of semi-speakers shows this. It is stated that semi-speakers are at the forefront of learning, relearning, and revitalizing their heritage languages and cultural practices. It said also that semi-speakers want to become speakers again, so culture and traditions can be preserved, continued, and transmitted to the future generations. To succeed, they need to find strategies and tools to assist them, as each individual is different. They agree that given tools and strategies, semi-speakers should be given opportunities to see themselves as playing lead roles in language revitalization. Furthermore, it is also possible for semi-speakers to develop into fluent speakers and become effective teachers. It's argued that the use of terms Dorian uses in her research, terms such as imperfect, language death, and major problem, all appear to create negative views toward language and semi-speakers. Juso's writing on silent speakers takes on a more positive outlook as she questions about who exactly knows anything perfectly, as she acknowledges the pain of not speaking one's ancestral language and appears to also question Dorian's choice of the word imperfect. Juso sheds light on the fact that language is connected to feelings and that it is troublesome to be afraid and have feelings of grief, loss, and shame. In an encouraging statement, she says that language is not just about grammar and words, but also about thoughts and feelings. Juso also adds that thoughts control the feelings connected to language use. Mainstream and traditional therapeutic methods of healing. Today, Aboriginal peoples are beginning to understand the effects of intergenerational trauma caused by colonization and how it has created many self-destructive behaviors. They are becoming more aware of trauma-informed practices which create an understanding and responses to the impact of trauma on people. There have been projects created using a mainstream therapeutic method called cognitive behavioral therapy, also known as CBT, to assist silent speakers to reclaim their language. Two of the earliest forms of cognitive behavioral therapy were rational emotive behavior therapy, developed by Albert Ellis in the 1950s, and cognitive therapy, developed by Aaron T. Beck in the 1960s. REBT was a type cognitive therapy first used by Albert Ellis, which focuses on resolving emotional and behavioral problems. The goal of the therapy is to change irrational beliefs to more rational ones. The approach helped people to identify irrational beliefs and negative thoughts that could lead to emotional and addictive behaviors. Beck's system of therapy is similar to Ellis's, but has been most widely used in cases of depression. Cognitive therapists help clients to recognize the negative effects and errors in logic that cause them to be depressed. The principles of CBT are based on the belief that people have the ability to change their lives by changing the way they think. Jusso wrote about how the Sami people of Sweden and Norway had noticed the decline of Sami language speakers. Realizing that the language was an important part of their identity and cultural knowledge, they knew that action was needed to take back and relearn their language. They began a language blockage project and used cognitive behavioral therapy as a strategy to assist Sami people who were silent speakers, and found it to be successful for language revitalization. Jusso explains how cognitive theory is based on the assumption that learning is affected by feelings and thoughts. Jusso, the developer of the courses in Sweden, then gave permission to the First Nations Peoples Cultural Council to translate course materials for pilot silent speaker programs in British Columbia. Reclaiming My Language, a course for silent speakers, is based on the successful program that was developed in Norway and Sweden for and by Indigenous Sami peoples. First Peoples Cultural Council adapted the program through pilot courses within 7 First Nations communities in British Columbia. Another mainstream therapy called narrative therapy can also be helpful in collecting personal narratives from silent speakers. Narrative therapy is a form of psychotherapy that helps people to identify and live their values and skills so they can deal with current and future problems. Harder explains how stories have the power to impact how we think, act, and feel, and have the potential to connect, inform, and influence us as individuals, families, and whole communities. Harder also goes on to explain how narrative therapy seeks to help people understand the stories that influence their lives and to create greater choice through highlighting those experiences that fit with their preferred story. Although these therapies would be useful and helpful within Aboriginal communities, it is also important to include culturally relevant and appropriate therapeutic methods from within the community itself. And as Ojibwe scholar Renee Linklater states, therapies need to come from the worldviews of the people and must maintain their connections to the land, language, people, and knowledge. Linklater also states that Indigenous ways of healing have existed since time immemorial, and that cultural approaches are essential for Indigenous people to move forward in healing from colonization. In the community of Akwesasne, The practice of Kanien'kéha, uplifting of the minds, a Ludinoshuni condolence ceremony, is still used to deal with feelings of grief associated with loss. It has been used since the acceptance of the message of peace by the Ludinoshuni, which has been estimated to have been brought over 1,000 years ago. Shaimini explains how the words embedded in the wampum strings enable the mourners to clear their bodies and minds from the great loss they have suffered and to restore them again to the ranks of the sane. Traditional people of the Ludinoshuni have also developed various therapeutic methods in dealing with trauma, which have become popular within the communities because of the use of cultural knowledge and expertise, creating a sense of pride and identity, and will be discussed further within this project.